Welcome back, my fellow yarn addicts. If you watch my Yarn Weights Demystified video and want to know more about some of those terms I mentioned and how to put that info to work for you, grab a snack, settle in, and let's dig a little deeper. The core of what we are really talking about today is navigating the yarn selection process. In the knitting and crochet universe, there are essentially two types of patterns out there. The first type simply specifies a weight category of yarn like 160 yards of a worsted weight for this adult size beanie, or you will need approximately 200 yards of two different colors of fingering weight to make these socks in a men's size 10. With what we covered in part 1, you can now handle those situations fine. Pick a yarn that fits your budget and has colors you like and go have fun. The second type of pattern you'll run into are those that call for a very specific yarn, and now you could be potentially facing some issues like, what if that yarn is discontinued, or what if it's still available but you don't like the colors it comes in? Maybe it's wool and you don't want wool, or maybe you'd love to use that yarn but it's way out of your budget and you need to identify a suitable substitute. Content and color choices aside, knowing about gauge, grist, and wraps per inch can really help you out. On most yarn labels these days, the gauge is frequently shown in a little diagram, or it may just be a section of text. Regardless of the format, it indicates the number of stitches and the number of rows the manufacturer anticipates you will get in a 4-inch or 10 centimeter square using their recommended needle or hook size. This is a pretty good place to start because most patterns specify a target gauge, and if the gauge listed on the yarn you are considering is the same or close enough, you may have already found your solution. You may have to go up or down a tool size to achieve that gauge in your project, but that's what swatching is all about. Now, you'll notice that I used the words recommended needle or hook size a moment ago. I bring this up thanks to a situation I've bumped into time and again at work. A new yarn comes in and the recommended tool sizes and the gauge are both indicative of, say, a DK weight yarn. I get all excited because there is some pattern I'm obsessed with, maybe a tank top or something, and my brain thinks maybe this beautiful new yarn is finally the one. But then I really start looking at it and it seems a little finer than it should be. And this is the kind of situation when that wraps per inch or WPI measurement I talked about in part 1 can come in very handy. To get a wraps per inch reading, all you need is something that has 1 inches in it marked in accurate intervals. An old-fashioned ruler will work. I prefer tools made specifically for the purpose. You have pretty ones that are out there made out of wood. This is a compact little 3D printed one we sell at the shop where I work. These are great. This fits in my little tchotchke box. I have seen gauge rulers that have these notches built into the edge. As long as you have a 1-inch increment, you can take this measurement. I'm going to set my fancy one aside here. And if you want one like this, that's, real compact and portable, I'll leave a link to these in the show description. To get a wraps per inch reading, all you have to do is take that. I like to leave the tail end behind to start, and you start gently laying in side by side comfortably strands of the yarn. I'm not pulling real tight. I'm just laying them in there side by side. You're not trying to pack them in like this. You're just laying them in comfortably, not packed like sardines. And we're seeing how many strands can we lay in here like this. And especially with simple textured yarns, I'll only do this once or twice. With busy textured yarns, I might test 2 or 3 sections along the strand to see how many I get. But now we're just counting. We've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 strands. That would place this yarn firmly in the DK range. And sure enough, that's exactly what it is. This is Vintage Baby Hand Paints from Barocco, which is solidly in the DK range. That's it. That's all you have to do to get a wraps per inch reading. More than once, a WPI reading has shown a yarn to be a different effective weight, like our theoretical DK weight actually being a sport weight, and the fiber content is not something that is going to bloom and full out to a DK gauge even after it's been washed. Wraps per inch tests don't tell you everything about a yarn, but they have certainly saved me from choosing an inappropriate yarn for a project more than once. By the way, you may be wondering why a yarn manufacturer would classify a yarn as one weight when it looks and feels and reads like something else. In some cases, it has to do with the yarn being a unique blend or maybe a unique structure, and the manufacturer intended for it to be used in an open and low density fabric, and frequently they have published patterns that use that yarn exactly that way. Other times, I really couldn't say. With our hypothetical DK weight tank top scenario, now what are my choices? If I'm still emotionally stuck on the yarn I fell in love with but now know is too fine thanks to that Wraps Pinch test, I could 1. Hold the yarn double and use it anyway, or 2. I could use a smaller needle and follow the instructions for a larger size in the pattern, and I could still end up with something that fits. Or 3, I could keep the yarn and find a different pattern that calls for a sport weight instead. These are all viable possibilities, and I promise they are all much more appealing choices than starting a project with the wrong yarn. The last critical concept we want to cover is a strange old term called grist. Grist is a term from the spinning world that refers to a yarn's yards per pound measurement. You remember the yards per 100 grams ranges I gave you in part 1? Grist is essentially the same idea but applied at a little deeper level. I found a really great article that talks about grist and how it applies to substituting yarns, and the link to that article can be found in the show description. But the basic takeaway is that a yarn's fiber content and structure have a pretty strong impact on its yardage to weight ratio. Choosing a yarn that has a similar yardage to weight ratio can improve chances that the yarn will be a good match for your pattern. An example would be a DK weight wool versus a DK weight linen. Wools tend to be lighter and plant fibers tend to be heavier, so even if both yarns recommend a US 6, have identical stitch and row gauge diagrams, and have identical Wraps Pinch readings, they are likely to have very different weight to length ratios. For small projects like cowls and things, it may not matter much, while at other times, like large sweaters or shawls, it could make all the difference in the world. So it helps to keep grist in mind as you are selecting your materials. There are many hundreds of yarn companies across the planet, and with the ability to shop online for just about any yarn from almost anywhere, it can be really intimidating trying to sort through all your options. If you are lucky enough to have a local yarn shop or two in your area, all those lovely yarns on the shelves can be just as overwhelming if you don't know where to start. I sincerely hope this video makes yarn shopping more enjoyable for you and brings more happiness into your life through successful projects. My name is Shauna. I thank you for watching today, and please let me know what other topics I can cover to help you with your yarn journey.